CCL fans, welcome back. And this is our first ever collaborative episode. With me today is Brent Olson. You may or may not know about his channel. He runs a channel called BRUTUS on Baseball. And what really attracted me to his channel is because he talks about, it was about the Hall of Fame and players who, may get into the Hall of Fame. Some guys who, they've had a decent career. They've really got to have a push. But he talks about that in the light of sports card investing. And you guys know on this show, the number one reason I started CCL Sports Cards was to help you make money in sports cards, but also to help you avoid the pitfalls that I've run into over time, i.e. buying the wrong guys or too much of the wrong guys. But Brent has a really unique perspective when it comes to collecting cards. He has, let's say, more of a Hall of Fame focus, but also focuses on players who are established, but have had sort of maybe a down year. Whereas in CCL, I mean, pretty much you've seen my collection of, guys like Bryce Harper and Betts, but we do a lot of prospecting. So Brent has has a channel on YouTube called BRUTUS on Baseball, and you can also follow him on Instagram, but I'll let him talk more about that. It's so good to have Brent Olson on the show. I'm so super excited he agreed to be on the show. And with that, let's welcome Brent to the show. Brent, welcome, buddy.
How you doing, Chris? Good to see you again.
It's good to see you, brother. I feel so blessed to have you on the show. I mean, when I first saw your show, I'm like, what a unique perspective. I've never really gone after Hall of Fame guys. And we could say that we all know as collectors, we should probably be loading up our collections with guys who are in the Hall of Fame because, the cards, from my point of view, tend to disappear over time into people's collections. And in my universe, that means scarcity equals a value increase. But much like I tell my viewers, we can get caught up in the prospecting world. So that's the reason why I'm having you on today. So tell us a little bit about, I know I've given a snippet to the viewers, but tell us a little bit about your investing philosophy when it comes to baseball cards.
Okay, well, I guess I'll give a little bit of background first. I started collecting in the late 80s, early 90s junk wax era, right? So I missed out on the vintage era, but I got into prospecting too, all the way through the 90s. And I was looking at these young guys that were coming up and investing heavily in what I thought that they could be. And a lot of times that turned out, but most often it didn't turn out very well. And I have a lot of cards of guys that are just kind of junk now. They didn't really do much in the major leagues, even if they made the major leagues. And so at some point, I kind of shifted my collecting philosophy toward more established guys that either have been in the Hall of Fame already or are most likely to be in the Hall of Fame. And I really shifted my focus from modern cards to collecting backward, collecting vintage cards of guys that I don't have. But to be able to do that, to be able to finance that, I took the tack of looking at who's going to be in the Hall of Fame in the future, trying to invest in those guys so that when they approach that point of getting into the Hall of Fame, I can sell any extras that I have at a profit and then use that profit to be able to buy backwards in cards that I've never been able to get into before. And so as the recent guys that have gotten in, you can name anybody you want. Larry Walker, I sold off a lot of the cards that I had of his and I start buying guys from the 1970s, 1960s. And so that's kind of how I do it. How I do that with modern guys is I really do keep track, and you alluded to some of the videos that I created, top 10 guys under 30 that are on Hall of Fame track, top 10 guys over 30. I look at those guys and I keep track of who I think those guys are going to be. And I buy them with the prospect of one day being able to sell my extras and being able to buy the cards that I want from older years. That's kind of my philosophy, I guess. On top of that, I'm not going to go out and buy the guy that is having a great year right now this year. I'm going to keep in mind that he's likely going to have a down year at some point in the future, or he's going to get injured at some point in the future. And so they're going to forget about this guy. Most collectors will forget about this guy. And I'm going to wait for that time, right? So it's a bit of a gamble waiting for a down year and expecting that they'll have a bounce back year at some point, or they're going to continue having that career. And that's why that long-term really evaluation of each player comes into play here, and making sure that I'm buying the right guys, that I believe in these guys long term, even if they're having a down year.
It's funny if we back up maybe a minute. It's funny how you talk about getting into cards in the junk wax era because that was not, you've done episodes about that and about junk wax cards, and that's when I started collecting. And I know when we first spoke, some viewers aren't going to get this joke, but the Kevin Moss joke. I mean, Kevin Moss in 1990 Upper Deck was all the rage. He was like $5 a piece. But I think, especially for myself, see, you've moved away from that for myself, and I think viewers are really going to appreciate is getting away from that and chasing who's going to be big. And with your propensity to buy guys who make it into the Hall of Fame, we talked about, I know you showed me your Todd Heltons, the Bazooka Todd Heltons and PSA 10. Those are fabulous cards. And then using those in sort of a backward way when they do get to the Hall to buy established players in the Hall. It's really fascinating. It's incredible. So how long have you been using this method?
I would say so. I am making a video series. You and I discussed this previously about prospects that busted, right? And I'm doing it over the course of my collecting years when I collected prospects. So starting in 1988 and going up through about 2005, 2006 is when I just stopped the whole prospect train. The answer to your question of when did I start this, a couple of years after that, I think it was by chance. I want to say it was Roberto Alomar or Barry Larkin, one of those two. And I had most of their rookie cards, but I had a couple extras. And when they made the Hall of Fame, I just kind of put it out there. Hey, I'll put up an eBay auction or whatever and see if somebody wants my extra. It's a good time to sell. And I was absolutely flabbergasted by how much I could sell more than what I bought before. And so that's when the idea really started churning. So I'd have to look back and see, what year Alomar or Larkin got in. I want to say it was the early 2010s, maybe 2010, 11, 12, something like that. And that's where the idea really started churning in my head. And I've done it, every year since then, predicting who's likely to get in coming years and really being able to see that. And so, I'll buy guys that have a down year. This year, we'll talk about some examples, but let's say Machado is a great example. He's having a really down year. Are his prices reflecting a down year? Because Machado was on a Hall of Fame path. There's very little doubt in my mind that he'll get there eventually. And so you look at guys like that when they have a down year.
You mentioned Machado, and I'm a big fan of. I mean, you could say the Padres in general are kind of having a down year. I know Soto kind of turned it on maybe in the last couple of weeks, but generally speaking, the Padres are having a down year. But you talk about Machado.
Yeah.
I mean, the last time I looked, because I pay a lot of attention to WAR when it comes to established players. Last time I looked, his WAR was somewhere around 60. Does that sound about where he's at, or was it a little lower than that?
No, it's a little bit lower than that. I want to say it's in the high 40s, but
High
it's
40s.
one of those.
Okay, yeah, I'm thinking of somebody else.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because I mean, given his age, and I mean, I always try to use I don't know how you do it, and I'll ask you about this, but do you sort of factor in, let's say, a 5 WAR per year to see where they're going to wind up based on their, with a decline? Does that make sense?
Totally does. Yeah. So, first of all, I think that we really have to be able to understand how players are being evaluated these days, right? So not everybody's bought into WAR, but let's be honest, most people have, and all the teams have, Major League Baseball has. They're evaluating players based on WAR now, based to figure out who gets raises at what rate. So this is a stat that's being embraced, and it's a stat that's being embraced by the writers that vote on the Hall of Fame. That's what the key is. So some of the older guys that are near retirement or already retired but still have a vote, they may not buy into it, but it's going in the way that players are going to be evaluated by WAR for Hall of Fame in the future. That's my bet. So when you bring up WAR, projecting what these guys get on an average year, 5 WAR, it's pretty much if a player has over 60 WAR by the end of their career, they're likely to get in the Hall of Fame. And so it's not always going to be, a foregone conclusion. You still have to vote for them. But if they're on a path to be able to get to 60 WAR, that's pretty good, right? So if you play 15 years, let's say, that's kind of a short career for Hall of Famer, but let's say 15 years, and you average 15, 30, 45, 60, that's about 4 WAR per season. So if you can average that, you have a pretty good path. A lot of these guys, Machado, for example, he's gotten seasons where he's had like 6, 7, 8 WAR. And so it allows him to have some down years in his 30s, but as long as he keeps playing and averages about 4 WAR per season, then he's got a pretty good case to be able to make the Hall of Fame long term.
Yeah, and I think it's something we could all do a bit more of as collectors. Again, as I spoke to, prospecting is, as I've called it, let's call it like it is, the way I see it. It's pulling on the arm of the slot machine. You really want to have a guy you buy for, say, $50 and he just goes to the moon. I mean, I'm sure we could talk a little bit about how, I mean, I know your viewpoints, but overall prospecting in general has kind of had this downward trajectory for a bit. And so your approach is really unique. And we talked about Machado, and I know we've also talked about Ronald Acuna, because I know he was somebody you targeted last offseason. So I find that intriguing, because last offseason, I buy a lot of baseball in the offseason. I recommend the viewers of CCL do that. But I'm always targeting the prospects in the offseason, maybe a little bit of regular players. But you targeted Acuna last year. So tell me a little bit about that and why. I mean, we all know Acuna has an incredible skill set. But the question is always, can he stay healthy? So tell me a little bit about the Acuna situation and how that's turned out.
Yeah, so I guess first what I'll say is that it depends on what your long-term plan is, right? So prospecting can be great if you buy a guy low and sell them as soon as they make the major leagues. That's when they are at their all-time high, if investing is what you're looking to do. But if long-term holding is what you're looking to do, look at Julio Rodriguez. He was so high last year, and then reality sets in. He's going to have struggles in his major league career. And so like anybody that bought at the height of him making the major leagues and making his first impression has lost out on a lot of money since that time. So that's what prospecting is about. What I'm doing is more of a long-term investment, that I'm banking on this guy's career to really pan out and have a long-term quality career, And so a guy like Acuna, he was super hot in 2019, 2020, 2021. Prices were sky high. And I didn't buy into Acuna at that time because it just felt like he was young. He's got a lot to prove. And the prices just don't reflect the reality of the situation. His prices were all about what could be his hype. But then the injury hit, right? He had that torn ACL. He was out for the year. He was having a phenomenal season up to that point. And it really got me to the point where I was starting to believe in him as a long-term hold. But that injury hit, he was out for the season. And when that happens, people just tend to forget. But what really caused his prices to go down was when he came back and he wasn't the same Acuna that we had seen just before the injury. That's when people, some people forget while he's on the injured list. But as soon as he comes back and he doesn't perform at quite the same level, people start jumping off the bandwagon. And in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, this guy's game is all about being fast, agile, being able to do every facet of the game really well. And he just came back from a knee surgery. So he's going to have some growing pains getting back to the game. He's going to be a little bit slower. And I think that's what we've seen this year. Give him a full off season of recovery, get him back on his feet, and now look at what he can do. He can launch the ball way farther. I think one of the most amazing stats that I've seen this season is all of Acuna's home runs over 420 feet in length. The guy is just launching the ball and he's stealing bases at a huge rate. So buying when he was down last year, when his numbers were down, that's the kind of timing that I look for. And so there is a little bit of risk there that maybe he doesn't come back and be his former self. And I have to take that risk into account. But I have to really evaluate, do I think that that player is going to be able to recover? I factor in what the injury was, what that is going to do to his game. And at the same time, what the deeper numbers tell me. Looking at Baseball Savant, for anybody that's familiar with that, looking at his hard hit rate, what his chase percentage is, what his barrel percentage is, exit velocities, things like that. Does he still have what he had before the injury? And with Acuna, I just really believed that he did. He just didn't have the foundation, the base in his knee to be able to be at his full game last year. And I believe that he would in the future. So that's a perfect example of jumping on at the right time for somebody that you believe in long term.
And so we could say, I know we talked about this, but we could say that the Acuna strategy has paid off in terms of making money in sports cards, like buying low in the offseason when Acuna, and I thought about this too. Is he going to be the same guy? Is he going to come back as the 40-40 guy? And that's a risk. But I'll sort of segue or attach that to there's risk in prospecting. I will be the first to say, and I'll use Patrick Bailey as a great example. I actually have an episode on my show where I called out the prospects where I got it wrong because he went to high A, then he went back to low A, and just it didn't look like he was going to make the majors. He was getting older, and I'm like, well, I missed on that one. Then all of a sudden, he's in the show, and Joey Bart's being optioned. But there's always risks associated with prospecting, and it can go sideways in a hurry or it can turn around. But there's risks associated with buying a player in the off season. But again, I'll just come back saying the Acuna strategy has paid off. We could say, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely has, right? So, like, even with the economy down the way it is, like his prices haven't bounced back to what they were pre-injury, but they're much better than what they were last year already. And if he continues at this pace and manages to stay healthy, then I think that they're just going to, improve only. I think that last year could be just a really down period. And if I choose to sell right now, I'm already making money on whatever I bought last year pretty easily.
Well, congrats. I mean,
Yeah.
it's incredible. I have to ask because I struggle with this personally. So when these opportunities come up, have you got a list? Like, how do you stay on track? I think that's going to be a key for people watching the show. How do you stay on track?
So the videos that you did mention, I do have a list of, the top 15, 20 guys in each age bracket that I think are on the Hall of Fame path. And that's how I base my videos that I make, right? So my videos are top 10 guys under 30. And then I've got some honorable mentions that are young, but could be on that track in coming years. And every year I update that list. I update their numbers. I kind of keep track of where things are and move them up and down based on how I see them fitting. If they had a bad year, if they had a great year. And I just kind of maneuver that way. And so I have to really keep true to that list. And as part of that, I really evaluate not just their numbers, but their perspective going forward, their injury perspective. So another great guy that I'll bring up right now, we talked about Machado. Carlos Correa is a great guy to talk about right now because he's having a really down year. And you have to discuss.
He hit a slam last weekend. I'm just teasing. He hit a grand slam last weekend. I was watching the game.
He did.
Anyways, go on. Correa is a great example. Go on.
Well, he's got skills. He's got talent. He is definitely on a Hall of Fame path as long as he keeps up what he's doing. Now, the Astros scandal aside, I don't need to get into that. Let's just talk about his skills as a player and forget about the outside part of it, the influence. Just his skills as a player. He's on a Hall of Fame path if he were to continue to do what he's doing. But you really have to ask the question, are you concerned about Correa because of what the Mets, what the Giants found last season that caused them to not sign him to a long-term contract? So those are the factors. I've got Correa on my list. I've got his numbers, but I also have to think about, is this guy going to be healthy? How much do I invest in this guy? How much do I need to be concerned about his long-term viability as a player, as opposed to another guy that's having a really down year, Francisco Lindor? There's no real injury history there. Do I believe that he's going to be better? Which one do I choose to invest in more, especially when they're both pretty neck and neck in terms of career value? So those are the lists that I constantly kind of refer back to and try to make decisions on, are these guys a good idea or a bad idea going forward?
That's incredible. I've tried making lists myself, and I consider myself to be an organized guy, but that is incredible, to keep track of things like that, because I think for people watching this, I think that's going to remove a lot of emotion for you. And let's call it what it is, whether it's prospecting, and we get emotional. We get emotional about the perceived value that a guy can get, but when you've got a list and you stick to it, I think that's really effective. That's amazing, Brent. So I have to ask, you said Correa. Who is your number one guy aside from Correa to target right now? And I don't want you to give away your trade secrets because I know this is something you do. This is how you make money. But, share a little bit. Who's one guy you're taking a look at who you think, may get to the Hall, and you could be wrong, that's okay. But he may get to the Hall, but they're having a down year and you're targeting them. So who would that be?
Yeah, so in preparation for this, I made a full list, right? All the guys that I'm kind of considering this year. And
A whole
like I
list.
said,
Let her rip. The viewers are
I,
gonna love it. Let her rip.
just like bang, 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 right? And to be honest, it's not going to be that hard to figure it out. If you go and watch my videos, you're going to see who's in my top 10. So you're going to know who's on my list and kind of where they rank. And then you look, are they having a good year or bad year? It's pretty easy to figure out, right? So, but then you have to look at what have the prices actually done. So if you look at Machado, I'm actually not buying a lot of Machado right now because his prices overall have not dropped that much since the offseason, even though he's having a down year. So I'm keeping an eye on Machado, seeing if his actual prices actually drop down or not. And if they do, I'll jump on it because long term, I think he's going to be just fine. But I'm not quite there yet. Other guys that, let's see, where's a good one? You know who has really dropped a lot that I'm targeting pretty heavily anytime I see something really cheap is Alex Bregman. A lot of people don't like Bregman. A lot of people don't like the Astros thing. Set that aside. Alex Bregman is a consistent machine. That's what he is. He's not going to wow you. I don't think he's going to be top 5 MVP. But I compare him a lot to a guy like Scott Rowland that just made it into the Hall of Fame this last season. Consistently really good at what he does.
Scott Rowland was, I mean, some viewers may not. Scott Rowland was just, I loved Scott Rowland. Still do. I'm glad he made the Hall. Go on.
Yeah. And so Alex Bregman had a down year last year in the beginning of the season. And he came back and he had a very solid year. I think 4 or 5 WAR, something like that, probably around 4 WAR. Again this year, really, really slow start to the season. He was hitting below 200 for the first month, just a couple home runs. He came back again. And I think that that's just what he does, right? So if you can look at these
There's
guys,
a pattern there, yeah.
There's a bit of a pattern.
So I'm very much a pattern guy, and when I hear patterns, I'm like, there's a pattern there. So slow start, and I talk about prospects. I'm like, they get promoted as an example, and I tell the viewers, this is incredible. I tell them, look for patterns. Does a guy get promoted to Double-A, and then just kind of scuffle for a month or so, and it tends to be pattern-esque. So I love this. So you're saying with Bregman, there's a pattern.
There seems to be a pattern, right? And so a slow start to the season is death for a player's collectability sometimes. It's really hard to recover from that. So even if you look at this last year, you look at his April stats, and then you look at his full year stats, you see that he still ended up hitting 260 with, whatever it was, 25 home runs and 4 WAR. That's a pretty solid season, especially for a guy that's 28 and already has 5-6 seasons of all-star level type play.
I feel like his WAR was around 30 last I looked, or 28 or somewhere. He's got a pretty decent career WAR so far. Yeah.
He does.
Bregman's on a list with me as well, just because he just seems to be so out of favor. So that's incredible. And so you've been adding Bregman, then we could say.
Well, yeah. So you look at guys that have their rookie cards kind of in that 2016 to 2018 range. He's in 2017. And you look at the price comparison, you can get Alex Bregman rookie cards for, $12 for a Topps Chrome. PSA 10.
Really?
It's super cheap right now. And you have to be selective. You can't bid people up on eBay, but just go in there and grab something. So, I think I've brought home some Bregman rookie cards, like a Topps Chrome Prism Refractor SGC 10 for like $25 delivered to my house. And for a Prism Refractor of a rookie guy from that period that's on a Hall of Fame path, like those are really cheap prices. So
yeah, and the pops, even for the Prisms, I don't know much about, we do a lot of Bowman Chrome on the show, but I know that with 2017 Prisms, the pop in that has to be pretty low. I know the print runs were a little lower than they are today. So that's, at $25. And you anticipate at some point those could be 2x, 3x. Any idea on what the trajectory would be as he continues?
Yeah, so the type of player that Bregman is, you have to know what you're getting into, right? So I don't think that he's going to be that MVP caliber guy that we thought that he might be in his second year, third year. But I think that he's going to be consistent. And he's one of those guys that he doesn't seem to get injured. He just seems to produce by the end of the year a very consistent amount, has a good WAR. And so what you're going to see with him is not these big spikes and valleys in his prices. You're just going to see a constant climbing as he goes over time. And if I can get cheap cards that I can sit on for a while, then that's how I collect. That's how I enjoy collecting. And by the end of his career, if he keeps on this path, then you could see these at least double, triple, if not more. I do keep a spreadsheet of all the cards that I bought and what I paid for them and what I sell for them at the end of the day. And
I knew I
so,
liked you, Brent. I got the same thing. I'm like,
yeah,
I must have picked up on that because I got a spreadsheet too. I love that. Amen
yeah,
to that.
yeah.
So with time in mind, I do have a couple of questions I want to finish up with. And thank you so much again for your time today. What is one mistake you have made in the hobby? And maybe you've already shared that earlier on. What's one mistake you've made in the hobby that you think will be beneficial to people watching this who they may not have made this mistake, or they may be making it right now, and maybe you can save them hundreds and thousands of dollars?
Hmm. Um, Gosh, I've made a lot of mistakes in that hobby.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, totally, right? Before I had a plan, I didn't have a plan. I just kind of collected whatever was fun at the moment.
Mm,
And if you're looking at just having fun, then that's fine. But if you're looking at it from an investment angle, then it's not going to always work out for you, and you need to understand that. I have a lot of junk slabs from the early 2000s of rookie cards that never made it anywhere. I don't know what to do with
I
those,
got a couple of
but
those.
yeah, totally right. So there's definitely some mistakes there. Other mistakes, buying with your emotion or your heart rather than your head. Last year, I sold several of my Aaron Judge rookie cards. Last year was not the time to buy Aaron Judge. You know, this year he's great. He's a great player, but there will be a year in the future where he is injured, where he is not performing at this level anymore, and that would be the time to buy Aaron Judge. The only exception to that, and here's maybe a mistake I can share too. Mike Trout is a great example of that. Like, his cards are just in the stratosphere, and I never got on the Mike Trout train, and so I pay for that now. But again, Mike Trout is down compared to what he was 2 or 3 years ago. So there's a better time. You're just never going to find his rookie cards for under $1,000 anymore. They're going to stay up there for a PSA 10 top set update sort of thing. Other mistakes, I've got a list of guys too that I wanted to share. My strategy of buying
Yeah,
low doesn't always work out. There's some guys that
of
don't
course
make it
not.
back. Yeah. So great examples right here. Christian Yelich. He's never been the same player. And when he had his really down year, it was 2020. It was that half season. I figured, you know what? Like, give him a break. 2021 was a little bit down. I just started buying some here and there. But he's not the same player that he was.
He is not.
Yeah. Anthony Rendon. I didn't buy a lot of his cards, but I started thinking, he goes to the Angels. The Angels have the worst luck in the world at long contracts. He's gonna make it back to the field, and he still hasn't. So whatever I bought, is a bit of it's not an investment anymore when a player like that happens. So there's two examples. Chris Sale is one that I'm wondering about right now. I think he might be added to that list. Even though he's a great pitcher, he may not ever be the same pitcher as I thought that he could get back to. So there's a couple guys, but here's the thing. Even if I buy these guys, I bought them low. And if they don't turn out to be investments, eventually I think I can probably still sell them for what I paid for them. They're going to have at some point in their career. And Christian Yelich is a great guy that I've already decided I'm going to dump his cards that I have as soon as I get the chance. So in my mind, he's going to have a streak at some point in his career where he gets hot. He looks like the Christian Yelich of old, and I'm going to sell him at that point. A great example is this year I have sold all of my Andrew McCutchen rookie cards. He just didn't stay on that Hall of Fame path. I love McCutchen.
I love Kutch too. I love Kutch too.
He was one of my absolute favorite players to watch. He's just a great person. I kept a handful of his cards, but all those extra that I had, I sold them this year because he came back to the Pirates. He's actually been productive.
Emotion goes up.
Hit. That's the time to sell those cards. Yeah. And I've made money on every Kutch card that I bought, even though incredible. He's not on a Hall of Fame path. So there will be guys that don't work out, but you still, as long as you have the luxury of being able to hold long term and not have to get out from under these cards, there will be a time where it makes more sense to sell.
I think that's really, really important key, and I'll end there because thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your losses. It's something I love doing because, I keep on my shelf back here. I've got a Kevin Maton orange on my shelf to remind me that, when emotion is at its peak, it's probably best to stay away. But I shouldn't say I love your approach because guys like Yelich or Kutch, they're going to have a streak, but they still have some value. When a prospect goes to zero, I mean, that's it. So
Yeah.
it's really good in the sense that, yeah, they're losses, but maybe you're getting 50 cents on the dollar in return or 40 cents on the dollar. Whereas I'm speaking from experience now, learning the hard way, like most people, we're talking 5 cents on the dollar with some of these guys because they become worthless. So
Absolutely.
I really appreciate your candor and being open about your losses because that is part of the hobby. I don't make money on everything I buy either. In fact, my last episode, I said I sold some things at a loss. I had to generate some cash flow. I love that. Thank you, Brent, for that vulnerability. I love it, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Prospecting is really a all or nothing sort of thing. You can either really make a ton or next to nothing. Mine is lower risk, lower reward, but you can still figure out a way to do it so that you're coming out on top.
Yeah. Brent, this has been so much fun. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how grateful I am you came on the show to just share with my viewers your perspective on collecting baseball cards. Where can my audience find you, brother?
Yeah, so I've got my YouTube channel. That's where I spend a lot of my energy, my effort. It's all about
great.
baseball.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. It's called Brutus on Baseball. I'm sure you can put some words down here or something like that.
Yeah, we'll put it up on the screen.
Yeah, so, and I share all things baseball. I'm not just a card collecting guy. I love the game. And so I've got a ton of videos on there about the history of the game, how we got to be where we are with free agency or the Hall of Fame, how it works, all that kind of stuff. So you can find me on there. You can find me on Instagram. I do put some stuff up on Instagram, try to do some content there. Also Brutus on Baseball. And then, yeah, that's basically where you can find me. Yeah.
It's where I found you. And again, I'm sure my viewers are going to enjoy this. Even though some of your content on YouTube is only baseball based, it can be quickly tied to sports cards because that's what I did when I started watching your show. I'm like, we can tie this to sports cards fairly easily. Brent, thank you so much for your time, brother. Happy Tuesday to you. And I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Chris. I really appreciate it.
For sure.